Hey guys, Christy here with Little Roots Ranch, and today we're going to be talking about the U.S. hardiness zones. So I don't know if you know your hardiness zone or not. If you do, go ahead and comment that down below so I have a good idea of where everybody's at. If not, it's really easy to find out. In Google or any search engine, just type "what is my hardiness zone" and you enter your zip code and it'll tell you right away. It's important to note, however, that there are differences. Even in the same town, there can be different zones depending on different microclimates or anything like that. Like for instance, a downtown area tends to be a heat island and be a little bit warmer than like a surrounding suburban and especially a rural area because of all the heat generated by like the buildings, reflective surfaces, all of that stuff. So there is quite a bit of difference. Also, elevation does play a key in, your hardiness zone. Now, why would all those make a difference? Well, the zones are dependent on what is your average annual minimum temperature. And that's important. Average annual minimum temperature for your area. Now, there are 13 zones, obviously 1 through 13. And the temperatures range from -60, which is really cold, all the way to 70, which, as a side note, can you imagine your like absolute minimum temperature being in the winter being 70 degrees? To me, that's wild. But that's how the zones are made up, with say 1 being found in, of course, Alaska, and zone 13 being found in Hawaii or Puerto Rico, somewhere warm, and then everyone else kind of falling in between. Personally, I am in zone 8B. Now, for zone 8, that means that my average coldest temperature in the winter is between 10 and 20 degrees. My average temperature at night is about 30 to 40, but it's the lowest temperature that can be expected is between 10 and 20 degrees. And that's what makes me zone 8. Each zone number, just the numbers for right now, are in 10-degree increments, with of course zone 1 being the -60 to -50 and zone 13 being between 60 and 70, of course positive, in Fahrenheit, right? So I'm zone 8. So again, lowest average temperature would be between 10 and 20 degrees. But I had mentioned that I'm zone 8B. Well, what does the B mean? Well, there's A and B for each zone. And basically, if the number is 10-degree difference, the A and B is just further segmenting that into 5-degree measurements. So zone 8A would be between 10 and 15 degrees. And my zone 8B, is between 15 and 20 degrees. So that means that my average minimum temperature for the winter is between 15 and 20 degrees. Now, why is all this important? Because it is. This is important, not necessarily for annuals, but for perennials, like trees, shrubs, bushes, everything that's going to be growing year round. And that's because not everything can survive on both extremes. You can't grow blueberries in like South Florida during the winter. It's just simply too hot. Or we all know the chilling hours that a lot of fruit trees need and stuff like that. You just can't grow them in areas that they're not best suited. And of course, something like a banana tree, how exciting, right, is not going to overwinter even in my area, and especially not in, say, like Alaska or Eastern Washington or any of the cold northern states. And so that's why it's important to make sure and look up and know your zone so you can know what kind of plants, specifically again, trees, whatever, shrubs, that can overwinter. And even some vegetables that we grow as annuals, like say tomatoes. For me, I could never keep tomatoes overwintered. not naturally, at least. And that's not just because of light, because I'm up north, right? And so I get like 10 minutes of light a day, not literally, but it kind of feels like it. But also just the minimum temperatures. Whereas like if you're in zone like, I don't know, say 11, then you can keep tomatoes and overwinter them and they'll keep producing. They'll be like a small tree of tomatoes, which is really, really awesome. But then they don't get blueberries. So, it's a trade-off. But that's why it's important to know. Again, it doesn't play a big role in, say, like your annual vegetables, but it is important in your perennial thing, trees, shrubs, whatever. Now, the U.S. hardiness zone has become kind of a standard of assessing the permeability of a plant in the United States. But what's interesting is that the National Gardening Association has said that the U.S. hardiness zone map is excellent for the east side of the United States. Well, what about the west side, which I'm Washington? And they said that it's too varied because there's things like deserts and forests and hills and all of that varied elevation and stuff that makes a really big difference. And so there's so many microclimates and also different things. Like I'm so far up north, everybody that's like on my longitude, is it latitude? I don't know, it's one of them. But anybody that's on my, I think I'm like 49, I don't remember. But anybody who's up north with me has far colder winters. But I'm just before the mountains. And so I don't know, like the warmth stops at the mountains and then you guys get all the cold stuff. But I also don't get any sun. So it's, hit and miss. But the West Coast or the west side of the United States is a lot more varied. For instance, I'm in zone 8, but also Tucson, Arizona is in zone 8. Now, we may have a similar or very almost exact lowest annual minimum temperature in the winter, but they're a desert and I am not. I get a lot more rain and wind and snow and just climatic stuff. And so even though we are the same, we're not the same. And so there's a newer development for the west side of the United States, and that's called the Sunset Climate Zone. And you won't find that on seed packets or not most of them at least, or I don't think I've seen on any of them, like the U.S. hardiness zone. But that's kind of interesting. I looked at it and I found that I was zone 4. But basically it just breaks it up. It takes the average minimum temperature, but also includes things like rain and snow melt and all of that stuff to kind of give you a better picture. Because temperature alone, of course, is really helpful, but it doesn't paint a complete picture, of course. And yeah, let me just check my notes, make sure I'm not forgetting anything. Let's see here. If you're finding this helpful, go ahead and drop a like below so that I know that you're liking it. I hope you're liking it. I hope it's beneficial and that you could find your USDA hardiness zone. And so that way it can help you with, growing like fruit trees or whatever. I highly recommend growing fruit trees. But yeah, I think I did cover everything except for I wanted to say that you can just because a tree or whatever isn't in your hardiness zone doesn't mean you can't grow it. It's just going to mean that there are going to be a couple or several additional challenges that you need to have a plan for. As an example, in Western Washington, our zone is not compatible with citrus trees, lemon trees, more specifically, because who doesn't love lemons, right? And so it's always a dream, like avocados and lemons are never going to be things that I can grow. But I do know quite a bit of people who grow a lemon tree, but it's obviously not just out there in the winter. They bring it inside, or they have some kind of like heated greenhouse for it or something like that. I don't do anything like that. I kind of have like dreams about it, but I don't know. But so it can be done. Like you can always like test things, and And especially if you're in like a warm pocket of your zone or a cold pocket, I guess, depending on which way you're going. And you can definitely try things, but it's just, think of the hardiness zone as kind of a guide and a starting point. And then as you become more familiar with your situation, and then you can try and work with that to try and grow some of the things that you really want to grow that don't typically grow really well in your area. But again, so just as a quick recap, the hardiness zones, there are 13 of them. The number, which is 1 through 13, corresponds with 10-degree increments of your average lowest minimum temperature. And then there are also letters that go with it, A or B, like 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B. And those just further drill down into the 5-degree increments. So either you're on the top half or the bottom half, B being the warmer half and A being the colder half. So I'm zone 8B, which is the range is from 10 to 20 degrees, and the B meaning that it's actually 15 to 20 degrees on average. So I'm warmer in the winter than zone 8A, but I am colder than zone 9, if that makes sense. And it's not important for annuals because, unless you're trying to overwinter them or something like that, more for trees, bushes, and things that are perennial and biannual and all that stuff. And it's a really great guide to understand what will work in your garden. One thing that's important though is that it doesn't matter with annuals. Like, again, because most of us, we have cooler summers here in the Pacific Northwest, Western Washington, but most of us have warm summers in general regardless. Even if you have a really, really cold winter, those same places tend to have really, really hot winters. They get both extremes. And so even though it's cold in the winter, you're not growing tomatoes then, but you can grow tomatoes in the summer. So, and always feel free to push the limits and try new things and experiment, and what might work for somebody may not work for you, or what works for you may not work for somebody else. And happy gardening. If you have any questions about the U.S. hardiness zone, go ahead and drop them down below. If you already know your zone or you find your zone, drop that down below. I'd love to know where you're from and see how many 8Bs or zone 8s I have. And happy gardening and have a great day. Bye.